The purpose of LearningWalks is to improve teacher instruction via the power of collaborative team reflection and feedback tied to structured classroom observation. LearningWalks are an opportunity to engage in collaborative inquiry. What is the teacher doing that is working? What is the teacher doing that is not working? Problem-solving more productive strategies. Modeling and feedback are the heart of human learning, any age, level, and profession, including teaching.
Now, I got to tell you something. One of the premises that our work is based on, we've already talked about because it's the same for your students. If we want to get smarter, more proficient, it can't be done without lots and lots of feedback. And be clear, that means we have to scrub in with each other. Every other profession has a clear process for how you learn stuff. And it's not by talking about it only. We're the only profession that I can think of. Pilots would think it'd be absurd if you only talked about it. They have flight simulators and then they have all the printed, surgeons. I'll never forget, I had a conversation probably about 7, 8 years ago. I fly a lot. And I can tell instantly, because I'm a talker, but I also, like to veg on the airplane or have my iPod and have, 4,000 songs, what have you. So I have my travel gig down. So I always introduce myself, and then I can tell instantly if there's, if we want to have a conversation or not. And so there's this guy who clearly wanted to talk, and it turns out that he was an orthopedist, and he was on his way. We were flying from San Luis Obispo up to San Francisco, and he was going on up to Seattle, my hometown. And he was a joint replacement specialist. That's just not a passive interest of mine, seeing as how broken down runner, a couple of bad ski injuries in my past. I can see if the good Lord's willing, I live long enough that a knee replacement might well be in my future. So I had more of a passing interest in the conversation. And he was telling me, oh yeah, there's new stuff all the time. They just had this partial knee replacement thing that was brand new. This was a few years ago when it was new. And he was flying up, and he's going to spend a week and a half, 10 days at the UW Med Center. And he's going to scrub in with colleagues so he can learn how to do it. And I said, what do you mean scrub in with? And he sort of looked at me like, well, how else would you learn how to do something, I've already read about it. I've already seen videos on our internet about it. Now I'm going to go and learn how to do it. And I said, well, I'm a learning guy. I'm a teacher. Tell me how you learn how to do it. And he said, oh, it's real simple. You go up there, and I'm going to do about 25 procedures in like 8 days, about 4 or 5 a day. And what's going to happen is the first half dozen or so, I'm just going to watch, learn their procedures, learn how they work with their anesthesiologist, all the rest of it. I'm going to scrub in with them. I'm just going to watch. Then I'm going to actually be a surgical partner for about another 7 or 8 procedures where I'm going to do the portion of it that I already know well, but in this new part that I'm unfamiliar with. Then I'm going to back out, but I'm going to be like a med-surg nurse. I'm going to be right there on their elbow. Then I'm going to do about 10 where I'm going to do the lead surgery on the entire thing, but they're going to be at my elbow, so if I overlook anything, forget anything, they'll intervene and make sure the patient gets the optimal result. And I said, well, that's what in education we call I do it, we do it, you do it. They said, well, yes, exactly it. How else would you learn anything? And I thought, you know what? That's why we're about where medicine was roughly 80 years ago. Where you could just, if you were a barber, you could also hang out a sign that said, I'm a surgeon. And you could cut. You had the tools, you could cut. Now we look at that and think, oh my goodness, that's crazy. So this issue of scrubbing in with, right? So giving and receiving feedback is how we get better. All of us, you and me, your principals, your superintendents, it's all about feedback. Every single human, if you want to get better at anything, you need feedback.
The more precise and specific the feedback, the more valuable or actionable it is.
I was at Bend, already told you, end of August, and this very earnest young guy, anybody under 50 is young in my world, but he comes up to me afterwards and he has a list. He says, oh, a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Feldman. Boy, that was a fabulous workshop. Well, I learned so much. And he tells me, here's 4 specific things I'm going to do the first day of school. I'm going, wow, he had all that. I'm going to do precision partners. I'm going to do something for that. I said, well, and then he said, with all due respect, can I give you some feedback? Now, part of me is thinking, now who's this young whippersnapper giving Dr. Feldman feedback? But the other part of me said, shut up, of course. I said, yeah, of course, I'd love it. And he said, well, you know, I really appreciated how you regularly give us time to discuss and problem solve and think and write in the seminar. But I started noticing that, in fact, the last 3 times I actually timed you. When you said, for example, 2 minutes, it was actually 1 minute and 13 seconds. When you said 45 seconds, it was actually, and I'm thinking, oh man, this guy's like, you know, a geek in the most respectful, wonderful. I mean, raise your hand if you have geeks, meaning experts, you go to for stuff. Me too, yeah, so I mean that, I don't mean that as a pejorative, I mean it as a compliment. And I was going, oh, interesting, interesting. And then he said, here's what I do. So he's giving me feedback and then making it actionable. There's this little widget. In fact, I'll send you the email link. You can download it for free. So when I'm using PowerPoint with my students, I just simply set the widget and it automatically times it like you already have built in your smart boards. And then he gave me the rationale. He said, I know you don't mean this, but when you say 2 minutes and you only give us a minute, the message is what we're doing isn't important as what you're doing, and people start thinking it's all about you, not about us actually learning stuff. And I said, you know what, you're absolutely right. I believe that and thought I was honoring it, but I needed feedback so I could be better at it. Thanks a bunch. And so I emailed him the following day, said, Matthew, you rock. Thanks. I used it in the seminar that day, which I did in Culver, and I've used it every seminar, probably done a dozen since. And so I would argue whether you've been teaching 41 years like I have or 4 years, feedback is how you get better. From little things like a widget, but you know what? That little thing has made a difference. It's helped me be a little more precise, a little more effective in the seminars that I do, because one young teacher had cared enough and had the specific actionable feedback that then I could act on. So this is for all of us, not just some of us.
Mutual respect, sensitivity, and kindness are always honored in every Learning Walk interaction. Inquiry is valued. There is no one way to teach effectively. Participants have a shared, research-validated lens based on their intention to structure student engagement, language, thinking, and scaffolding.
So the shared lens that we talked about last time, and you have, would you go ahead and pick up your copy, it's white, of the Learning Walk observation tool? Because we're going to go now on a couple Learning Walks about review. I think that would fit well with what we've been doing so far this morning to now get out of our experience into some real classrooms. So the big idea is that when we synthesize and clarify and prioritize information from, for example, the Improving Adolescent Literacy Practice Guide and related research evidence, I put this together in 4 simple, without being simplistic, domains that we have good evidence and common sense that confirms these are areas worth focusing on. One is engagement. We don't have to repeat this. We already know engagement is important. The way we're defining it is everyone does everything. Number 2, language. And what we mean by language is academic language. What's that? Language you wouldn't ordinarily use in the hall. You too, me too. We would ordinarily use vernacular chat. What would we ordinarily use, everybody? Vernacular chat, because we want to be understood. We don't want to come off as pompous and pretentious. But when we're writing that lab report, when we're writing that biographical sketch, when we're explaining our thinking, we want to use precise academic language. Next, critical thinking. We want to make sure we're teaching students how to think, meaning how to compare, how to infer, how to argue, how to summarize, how to synthesize. Not just assigning it, that's different. Assigning summarization and teaching you how to summarize are not the same thing. And of course, different strategies carry more weight in different content areas. For example, in history, it's critical that students are taught how to take multiple perspectives and interpret the same events. Not nearly so critical in chemistry. So we want to make sure that we're teaching them the kind of thinking that's prized within that discipline. And last, and maybe hardest of all, scaffolding. Think of this as the water wings, the training wheels. So without dumbing down the content, we're watering up the support, so even the lowest kid, they're not going to be the same as the highest kid. Nothing you can do will make that happen. That's not the goal. The goal is get them a little more proficient than they were when they walked in. That's why when you look, for example, at the data from Madras, every subgroup grew. But the neediest grew the most for the obvious reason. So this is our shared lens.
Feedback to the teacher is suggestion framed as a hypothesis to be tested and validated. Results in the classroom, not subjective opinions, drive the learning walk experience. Observers can say to the teacher, "I wonder what would happen if..." Observers spend 15 to 20 minutes observing and collecting data in a given classroom. The group size for observers is 4 to 8 people, with at least half the group being classroom teachers. The learning walk can be facilitated by any respected colleague.
So when I have the pleasure of visiting a number of your schools, and others will be visiting, you'll be joining us, you'll drive over from your school, we'll meet at one that is geographically centrally located, or as much as we're able to do it. Here's what we're going to do, is we're going to, first of all, we've already agreed this is our instructional focus right here. And it's pulled primarily from the IES summary, or the practice guide we've already talked about this morning. Number 2, learning walks are teams. There's power in the collaborative. This is not like one-to-one coaching. That has its place. But we find, first of all, most of us do not have the budgets we can hire one-to-one coaches. And even if we do, one-to-one is often not as powerful as a collaborative of 8 or 6. And it consists of primarily teachers. Next, we're in the classroom 15 to 20 minutes, not all period, not 5 minutes. And we're collecting observational data the same way. We'll practice that in a moment. We're going to look at engagement. That'll be square one. And start there, because that's foundational. To the degree that you can do that and you're comfortable with that, then go ahead and add language and thinking and scaffolding. But when you try to look at all of it at once, oftentimes people are overwhelmed and go, there's too much going on. So just start with engagement. And then as you feel comfortable, add other things.
Here is an example of a learning walk data collection form. Classes can be covered by site administrators, rotating substitutes, teacher prep periods, etc. It works well to rotate teachers on and off the team to maximize the number of participants in a given day. Learning walks begin with a 10 to 15 minute meeting before the first observation to review the learning walk form, remind one another of the assumptions and norms for a successful learning walk, and clarify any questions or confusions. Immediately following the observation, the team meets with the observed teacher to debrief.
Then we debrief immediately. Teachers want to know. I've just had 8 of my colleagues in the classroom with clipboards writing stuff while I'm trying to teach my kids. I want to know what you saw right now. I don't wait till lunch or after school. No frickin' way. I want to know now. So one of us simply steps in and keeps the class going. Even if it's a content area that we know nothing about, we might structure some brief conversations where the kids have to review what's been going on. Then the teacher steps out. We provide feedback by starting with affirmations. And here's the most important part of the whole deal, is this. Is the affirmations, the questions, the wonderings, and the suggestions are all about tying, as explicitly as we can, student response as caused by the teacher. And I realize not every student response was caused by the teacher. The kids have a causal role too. But we can't directly change that. What we can change is the part of the equation that we're responsible for. What we did that in any way contributed to what the kids did or didn't do. And the tighter we can make that feedback, the more actionable, the more useful it is.
Research shows that an effective way to improve your teaching practice is to observe other teachers in action. Learning walks are a way to make this happen. Give it a try.